What happens when a guest thinks they're bigger than the show itself? When entitlement meets reality on live television and the cameras capture every single second of the meltdown? It only took one comment, just 35 seconds of unfiltered arrogance, for everything to completely fall apart. But before we dive into this absolute train wreck, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because we're pulling back the curtain on Hollywood's dark side, exposing entitled celebrities and their shocking behavior the cameras never showed you. We've got the raw footage they don't want you to see, and you won't want to miss a single reveal. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on this outrageous behavior. Now, let's get into it. The studio lights were hot that night. Bill Maher sat behind his desk, calm and collected like he always is. He'd been doing this for years, handling guests from every corner of the political spectrum. He knew how to keep things moving, how to challenge people, how to make good television. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, and from the moment she walked onto that stage, you could feel the tension in the air. Bill started the conversation the way he always does, straightforward and honest. So, let's talk about what's happening in Congress right now. There's a lot of division, a lot of finger-pointing. What's your take on finding common ground? Jasmine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Well, Bill, I think the real question is, why should we find common ground with people who are fundamentally wrong? The audience went quiet. Bill raised his eyebrows, still keeping his cool, because that's how democracy works. You talk, you debate, you compromise. That's literally the job. Maybe that was the job before, Jasmine shot back, her voice getting louder. But we're past that now. Some ideas don't deserve a seat at the table. Bill shifted in his seat. You could see him trying to keep this on track. Okay, but who decides which ideas get a seat? You? Me? That's a pretty dangerous road to go down. Jasmine laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was condescending, dismissive. Oh, please, Bill. Don't act like you don't know the difference between right and wrong. You've been doing this long enough. I have been doing this long enough, Bill replied, his voice steady. Long enough to know that shutting down conversation doesn't solve anything. It just makes people dig in deeper. Maybe some people should dig in deeper, Jasmine said, leaning forward now. Maybe some people need to stay buried. The audience gasped. You could hear it, that collective intake of breath. Bill paused, letting her words hang in the air. That's pretty extreme language for someone who's supposed to represent people. Jasmine's face hardened. I represent the people who matter, the people who are on the right side of history. And everyone else? Bill asked. The millions of people who disagree with you? They just don't matter? If they're voting against their own interests, then no, they don't get a say in my book, Jasmine snapped. Bill leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin but still maintaining his composure. That's not how this works. You don't get to decide who gets a voice. That's authoritarianism. Don't you dare call me an authoritarian, Jasmine fired back, her finger pointing across the desk. You sit here every week in your comfortable chair, making jokes, pretending you're some kind of truth teller, but you're just another old white man who doesn't get it. The audience went silent, dead silent. Bill's expression didn't change, but you could see something shift in his eyes. I'm going to ignore the personal attack and try to bring this back to the actual issues. Of course you will, Jasmine interrupted. Because that's what people like you do. You ignore the real problems and focus on being polite. Being polite? Bill said, his voice rising slightly. I'm trying to have an actual conversation here. You're the one who came on my show and started attacking me personally. Your show, Jasmine repeated, laughing again. Right. Your show, your platform, your rules. Sounds pretty privileged to me, Bill. Bill took a breath, clearly trying to reset. Look, I invited you here to talk about policy, about ideas. If you want to have that conversation, great. If you just want to throw insults, we can end this right now. Oh, so now you're threatening me? Jasmine said, her voice getting even louder. Classic power move. Guest says something you don't like, so you threaten to kick them off. I'm not threatening you, Bill said firmly. I'm asking you to have a respectful conversation. That's all I've ever asked from any guest. Jasmine stood up from her chair. Respectful? You want to talk about respect? How about the respect you owe to the communities you've mocked on this show? How about the respect you owe to people who are actually fighting for change while you sit here and play both sides? I don't play both sides, Bill said, standing up now too. I call out nonsense wherever I see it. Left, right, center. That's my job, and right now, you're talking nonsense. There it is, Jasmine shouted. The truth comes out. You think I'm talking nonsense because you can't handle someone who actually has conviction, who actually believes in something. I can handle conviction just fine, Bill replied, his voice calm but firm. What I can't handle is someone who thinks their conviction gives them the right to be disrespectful and dismissive of everyone else. Disrespectful? Jasmine's voice was at full volume now. You have no idea what disrespect looks like. You've never had to fight for anything in your life. You've never had to worry about whether you'd have a platform or a voice. So don't you dare lecture me about respect. Bill walked around his desk, standing a few feet from her. I've fought for plenty. I've been canceled, protested, threatened, but I keep showing up because I believe in open dialogue, something you clearly don't believe in. I believe in dialogue with people who deserve it, Jasmine shot back. And frankly, Bill, I'm not sure you make the cut anymore. The audience was completely frozen. No one was clapping, no one was cheering. Everyone was just watching this train wreck unfold in real time. Okay, Bill said quietly. I think we're done here. Oh, now you're done? Jasmine said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Now that you've been called out, now that someone's actually challenged you, suddenly the conversation is over? The conversation was over the moment you decided to make this about me instead of the issues, Bill replied. I gave you a platform. I gave you time. You chose to waste it on personal attacks. A platform? Jasmine laughed bitterly. You think you gave me a platform? I have my own platform. I have millions of people who listen to me, who believe in me. I don't need you, Bill. Then why are you here? Bill asked simply. Jasmine opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second, just a second, she seemed caught off guard. That's what I thought, Bill said. You came here because you wanted the exposure. You wanted to reach my audience, but you didn't want to actually engage. You just wanted to grandstand. This is unbelievable, Jasmine said, shaking her head. This is exactly what's wrong with media. People like you gatekeeping, controlling the narrative, deciding who gets to speak and how they get to speak. I'm not controlling anything, Bill said, his frustration finally showing. You've been speaking nonstop since you sat down. The problem isn't that you're speaking. The problem is what you're saying. And there's the real issue, Jasmine said, pointing at him again. You don't like what I'm saying, so you want to silence me. I want you to make sense, Bill corrected. I want you to actually answer a question instead of deflecting to attacks. That's all I've wanted this entire time. I don't owe you answers, Bill. I don't owe you anything. Bill nodded slowly. You're right. You don't owe me anything, but you owe it to yourself and your constituents to be better than this. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare tell me what I owe to my constituents. You don't represent anyone. You're just a comedian who got lucky. And you're a politician who's about to learn a very important lesson, Bill said quietly. What lesson is that? Jasmine challenged. That burning bridges doesn't make you brave. It just makes you alone. Jasmine stared at him for a long moment. I'd rather be alone than compromise like you. Bill walked back to his desk and pressed a button. We need security in here, please. Security? Jasmine's voice went up an octave. Are you serious right now? You're calling security on me? You've made it clear you don't want to be here, Bill said calmly. So I'm helping you leave. This is insane, Jasmine said, looking around at the audience. You're all watching this, right? You see what he's doing? He's literally trying to silence me because I spoke truth to power. No one in the audience said anything. The silence was deafening. 2 security guards appeared from the side of the stage. Bill gestured toward Jasmine. Please escort her out. Don't touch me, Jasmine said, backing away from the guards. I'm leaving. Trust me, I don't want to spend another second on this pathetic excuse for a show. The door's right there, Bill said, pointing. Jasmine grabbed her bag from beside the chair and started walking toward the exit. But she couldn't help herself. She turned back one more time. You know what, Bill? History isn't going to remember you kindly. You and everyone like you, sitting on your fence, playing it safe. You're on the wrong side. Bill looked at her with something that almost seemed like pity. I'm not on a side, Jasmine. I'm trying to figure out the truth. That's the difference between us. The difference between us, Jasmine said, her hand on the door, is that I actually care about people. You just care about your ratings. If that were true, Bill said softly, you'd still be sitting in that chair having a real conversation instead of storming off my stage. Jasmine's face flushed red. For a moment, it looked like she might say something else, might fire off one more insult, but instead, she just shook her head and walked out, the door slamming behind her. The studio stayed quiet for what felt like forever. Bill stood there, looking at the empty chair, then turned to face the audience. "Well," he said with a slight smile, "that went well." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Bill sat back down at his desk, adjusting his papers. "You know, I've had a lot of heated debates on this show, a lot of disagreements, but that was something else entirely." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Here's the thing," Bill continued. "I don't mind when people disagree with me. I actually enjoy it. That's why I invite people from all different backgrounds and beliefs. But there's a difference between disagreeing and being disagreeable. There's a difference between passion and disrespect." The audience was listening intently now. When you come on someone's show, when you accept an invitation to have a conversation, there's an unspoken agreement. You show up, you engage honestly, you make your case. You don't have to be nice, you don't have to hold back your opinions, but you do have to be willing to actually talk. Bill shook his head slowly. What you just witnessed wasn't a conversation, it was a performance, and not a very good one. Someone in the audience clapped, then a few more joined in. "I've been accused of a lot of things over the years," Bill went on, "being too harsh, too soft, too liberal, too conservative. But the one thing I've always tried to be is fair. I give people time to make their point. I listen. I push back when I disagree, but I listen." He gestured to the empty chair. "That person didn't come here to listen. They came here to lecture, to perform outrage, to get a viral moment. And you know what? They probably got it. This will be all over social media tomorrow. People will take sides. Some will say I was wrong to ask her to leave. Others will say I should have done it sooner." Bill leaned forward, looking directly at the camera. "But here's what I know. Real change, real progress, doesn't come from shouting matches and personal attacks. It comes from people who are willing to sit down, even with those they disagree with, and find common ground. It comes from people who understand that democracy is messy and complicated and requires patience." The audience was completely silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that comes from people really listening. "I'm not perfect," Bill said. "I get things wrong. I say things I regret. But I show up every week trying to understand the world a little better, trying to have conversations that matter. And I'll keep doing that, even when those conversations go sideways." He smiled slightly. "Even when they end with security escorts." The audience laughed, finally breaking the tension. Bill looked down at his notes, then back up. "We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have a guest who, hopefully, actually wants to have a conversation." The camera pulled back as the show went to commercial, and Bill sat there for a moment, alone, at his desk, shaking his head at what had just happened. In the hallway outside the studio, Jasmine was pacing back and forth, her phone already out, fingers flying across the screen. She was tweeting, posting, telling her version of what happened, framing herself as the victim, as the one who stood up to the establishment, who refused to be silenced. But inside that studio, the audience knew what they'd seen. They'd watched someone come onto a show, not to engage or discuss or debate, but to attack. They'd watched someone take an opportunity for meaningful dialogue and turn it into a circus. They'd watched entitlement and arrogance crash into reality. And they'd watched Bill Maher, a man who'd hosted thousands of conversations with thousands of guests, handle it with the kind of grace and patience that comes from years of experience. He didn't yell, didn't lose his temper, didn't stoop to her level. He simply stood his ground and asked for basic respect. When the show came back from commercial, Bill had a different guest in that chair. Someone who actually wanted to talk, to exchange ideas, to have the kind of conversation that makes good television and, more importantly, moves the conversation forward. But for those few minutes, for that heated exchange, everyone watching had seen something raw and real. They'd seen what happens when entitlement meets accountability, when performance meets substance, when someone who thinks they're above the rules discovers that, actually, they're not. Bill wrapped up the show that night like he always does, with his signature commentary and a few jokes, but everyone knew that the real story, the real moment, had already happened. It was the moment when a guest forgot that being invited onto a show is a privilege, not a right, that having a platform comes with responsibility, that you can't just show up and expect to be treated like royalty while treating everyone else like peasants. Jasmine Crockett walked onto that stage thinking she was going to own the conversation, dominate the narrative, put Bill Maher in his place. Instead, she exposed herself. She showed everyone watching exactly who she was when the cameras were rolling and the pressure was on. And Bill, he did what he's always done. He held the line. He maintained standards. He refused to let his show become a platform for personal attacks disguised as political discourse. The next day, the clips would go viral. People would argue about who was right and who was wrong. Think pieces would be written. Social media would explode with hot takes. But for anyone who actually watched what happened, who saw the whole exchange from start to finish, the truth was pretty clear. One person came to have a conversation. The other came to have a meltdown. One person showed respect for the format, the audience, and the opportunity. The other showed only contempt. One person walked away with their dignity intact. The other walked away escorted by security. And that, more than anything else, tells you everything you need to know about what really happened when Jasmine Crockett got kicked off Bill Maher's show. This wasn't about politics or policy or even personality. This was about basic human decency and the fundamental understanding that if you want to be heard, you first have to be willing to listen. Jasmine failed that test spectacularly, and in doing so, she proved Bill's point better than he ever could have himself. Sometimes the best way to win an argument is to let your opponent defeat themselves. And that night, in front of millions of viewers, that's exactly what happened. The entitled guest who thought she was untouchable learned a hard lesson. The cameras were rolling, the audience was watching, and when you burn bridges that publicly, that dramatically, there's no taking it back. Bill Maher went home that night knowing he'd done the right thing. He'd given someone a chance, multiple chances actually, to engage in good faith. When they refused, when they chose attacks over answers, he did what any good host would do. He ended the interview. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that there are still standards, still lines that shouldn't be crossed, still consequences for behavior that crosses from passionate to poisonous. That's what made this moment so powerful, so memorable, so absolutely jaw-dropping to watch unfold in real time. It wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted. It was just raw human interaction, captured on camera, showing the world what happens when entitlement collides with reality. And reality, as Jasmine Crockett discovered, doesn't care about your Twitter followers or your political position or your sense of self-importance. Reality just is. And on that night, reality was a talk show host who'd had enough, an audience that witnessed the whole thing, and a guest who walked off the stage having learned nothing except how to play the victim. The cameras captured it all, every word, every gesture, every moment of escalating tension. And now you know the whole story. This is what happens when Hollywood entitlement meets someone who refuses to play along. This is what happens when performance activism crashes into actual conversation. This is what happens when you mistake a platform for a pulpit and a host for a punching bag. Jasmine Crockett came to make a statement. Instead, she made a scene. Bill Maher came to have a conversation. Instead, he had to end one. And you just witnessed every single moment of how it all fell apart.